Welcome to the second episode of the Fancy Name Show. I still think that's what we're calling it. We haven't.
I like it. It's
yeah. Last week we talked about. What did we talk about last week?
Oh, it was all about this idea of Catholicity. And we spent time talking about how we should be Catholic, the idea of the big church,
the
big
Church Universal.
Yep, Church Universal.
This week,
different than the Universal Church and Triumphant. That's a different deal.
That is a different thing. I barely know anything about that, and I think
that's good.
Probably culty. Today we are talking about eating grass, big fish, the stars in the multiverse, and what they all have in common.
Wow, really?
Yeah, sovereignty. Today's word is sovereignty. I will read you the definition. Sovereignty, the biblical concept of God's kingly supreme rule and legal authority over the entire universe. God's sovereignty is expressed, exercised, and displayed in the divine plan for outworking of salvation history. Divine sovereignty is emphasized especially in the Augustinian Calvinist tradition, where it is paradoxically contrasted with human responsibility.
That's nice.
That's nice.
Yeah. I mean, and it touches on some important things, but
yeah.
The reason I think we're bringing this up is sovereignty is kind of a thing. I mean, it really is a question that I think all followers and actually seekers or even people that aren't Christians, they're going like, wow, can God make a rock that's too big for him to lift? You know, that whole kind of argument that's an old one that says, that sounds a little bit sketchy. Like, what do you mean by sovereignty? Is sovereignty where God's playing a chess game and we're just pawns on a table? Some branches of Christianity will go that far.
Yeah.
And go, I'm just a pawn and God's doing it and my will isn't involved really.
Right.
Or that's an illusion that I have a will.
Right.
And some
those arguments are even that they're big in the scientific community.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
scientific community sometimes jumps on that.
Yeah.
Especially if they're a scientism community where they're saying that's their religion and Christianity's out.
Right.
But sometimes you get certain Christian groups that are like, well, since God knows everything, which is another subject, we can have another day on omniscience. But since God knows everything, that means he causes everything. And if he causes everything, they slide sovereignty in there under that umbrella and say, well, then he's just doing his own thing and we don't even have a will. It's just all happening by what God does. These kinds of arguments then were countered at times by the idea that our will is like a marble flat table with a little marble on it, and our will is completely mobile. It can go in any direction it wants to. Well, the challenge with that is, there's this thing called the fall, and we are bent toward evil. I mean,
right.
I don't think it's a flat, even floor, and our will can do whatever it wants. We are corrupted in some ways, apart from what God does. I hope I'm not straying too far, but what I'm saying here is sovereignty, this is a live question. This is one that's been around a lot and a fair bit of confusion or difficulty.
Yeah. So I don't know if this throws a wrench in any order you may have had in your head, but you gave a few examples there about how we interpret the idea of sovereignty. The first example was, can God make a rock that he can't lift, right? Mm-hmm. And even to an extent, I think the human will portion of that statement falls into this question. The first thing, especially, making a rock that God can't lift, that feels more like, in my head, an ability. And ability, what does ability have to do with sovereignty? Sovereignty feels like an authority thing to me, like kingly was in that definition. Take a king. King can't dunk like LeBron. That doesn't mean he doesn't own the court if they're playing in Europe, I guess. We don't have a king. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what's that tension there?
Actually, I think it's a great question to ask. What's the difference between power and authority?
Okay.
What those are.
Or ability and authority.
Yeah. Ability to do something versus, and I think the idea of God's ability is probably a little bit smaller a factor than his authority. I think what Scripture talks more about is authority.
Okay.
I don't know if I want to go there quite yet. Can we go to a verse? Let's go to a verse
Take me there.
to get on this. There's a great story in Daniel about the king of the world, Nebuchadnezzar, and he gets given a dream.
Mm-hmm.
And in the dream, the big tree that is him is cut down. And there's a warning from God. If you stay on this track of pride and you keep thinking that you can do everything yourself, I'm going to humble you.
Mm-hmm.
And he manages it a whole 12 months. And the scripture reads that 12 months later, he's standing on the top of his veranda in his palace and saying, look what I did, look what I did. And he's struck. And the Lord says, do you remember? And he winds up crawling around like an animal for 7 times, whatever the number of times that is. He winds up really losing it and losing his authority, his position. And then it says, comes back to his sanity.
Right.
In fact, can we go there?
Yeah, yeah.
For a moment? Let's see if I can find it. I'm thinking of Daniel, which is right after Ezekiel. I need to remind myself. And I'm looking in chapter 4.
Okay.
And he's now answering. He's come back. He's coming back. Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar. He's finally getting it back together here. Let's see if I can find that. At the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven. My sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High, and I honored and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. Does that sound a lot like authority? That sounds like a ton like authority.
Yeah.
All the peoples of the earth are regarded as nothing. Then doesn't this fit into our sovereignty idea? He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. It's a beautiful line.
Mm-hmm.
But here, I think we're right on top of sovereignty. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, what have you done? Did you read there something about human will? I think I was hearing human will being a part of that.
Yeah, well, that definition was saying that the idea of sovereignty, biblically speaking, is paradoxically contrasted with human responsibility.
And I would expand that.
Okay.
He does as he wishes with the powers of heaven and the peoples of earth. I would say that it's not only human will that he exerts influence over or is compared to. I would even throw the angels, the demons, Satan himself. This kind of authority that God has is ultimate. It is ultimate. And that means overall. But it doesn't mean that we're on a chessboard and we're pawns being moved. He appeals to Nebuchadnezzar's will when he gives him the dream a year before. He's actually warning him. He's expecting a response, which is for a while.
Yeah.
And then Nebuchadnezzar fails and he goes right back to his pride. And God exerts authority even over the most powerful man on the planet.
Yeah.
Then that man responds. At some point he responds. His will is exerted, he responds. And in his response, we see human will at work. In this case, that human will is recognizing authorities, recognizing God's authority. And that may say a couple of things. I noticed that, and this is not exhaustive. This is just what I see in this little text here.
Yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar worships. God's sovereignty means he's worth worshiping. Yeah. We should worship him. It's definitely not ourselves. Worship him. I think that's one aspect. Another here, God's sovereignty means I'm humble in the face of that. Pride is a failure to recognize God's sovereignty.
Yeah.
When I think I've done it myself, when I think it's all about me, when I think I'm,
yeah,
we're actually working against the sovereignty of God. We're not recognizing the sovereignty of God. He recognizes the sovereignty of God.
I don't have this fully worked out, but it's just the thought that's bubbling there. Could it be, I'll pose it as a question, could it be that pride is a kind of form of heavenly power. Like if you go back to the very beginning, Genesis, right? God's creating everything at the very end. He's this is good, this is good, this is very good. That's a form of pride. God's taking pride in his work, right?
Taking pleasure, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So
what a good thing.
Yeah. And Nebuchadnezzar, that's the example that we're on right now. He's walking in a pride that is unearned, maybe.
Yeah.
Because
it is unearned.
Because what did you make? You've just borrowed things that God made.
Yeah,
right?
I gave you the breath in your body.
Right.
Yeah, come on, man.
Right.
Think about that.
And you can, I don't know, I think you can come up with a dozen examples of human pride getting in the way of a humbling to worship the one who should be sovereign. Like, is it Zechariah, John the Baptist's father? Right.
That's correct.
Right. He's humbled because he has some pride when he's told this thing's going to happen. And he goes, wow. And then he can't talk. Right. Saul to Paul. Right.
Getting knocked off your high horse.
Right.
It's
so
humbling a person. Yeah.
So I that's not a theological statement that I'm trying to invent here, but it feels like pride is something that is us usurping something that isn't ours. Like,
absolutely.
Like, pride is for God to feel.
And that's the first sin, isn't it? Satan wanted to be, or thought he could be, or felt that he was equal or better than God. I will ascend. I think that the biggest first problem with sentient beings, he's a being with will and mind, right?
Yeah.
The biggest problem with us is actually in this area of sovereignty, not recognizing God's sovereignty. And pride is the failure to recognize God's sovereignty truly, and to not recognize that we didn't make all this. We didn't do all this. I'm not the creator of all. I have gifts given to me by God. I am humble.
Yeah.
I recognize that. I recognize it in light of him, which might pull us to another passage. I'm thinking of, what am I thinking of? I was thinking of Isaiah, who might be the greatest on talking about another aspect of sovereignty. We're talking right here about sovereignty with regard to God and other beings that can choose.
Okay.
That's what we've been talking about.
Okay.
Isaiah may be the most beautiful on God's sovereignty compared to every other spiritual power, particularly idolatry and false gods. Isaiah does it the best.
Okay.
I'm thinking of Isaiah 46, and I'm going to read a couple verses.
Take me there.
The one of many where Isaiah has God speaking about the idols. With whom will you compare me or count me equal? To whom will you liken me so we can be compared? Some pour out gold from their bags, weigh out silver on the scales. They hire a goldsmith to make it into a god. They bow down and worship it. They lift it on their shoulders. They carry it. They set it up in its place, and there it stands. From that spot, it cannot move. Even though someone cries out to it, it cannot answer. It can't save them from their troubles. Remember this. Keep it in mind. Take it to heart. Remember the former things, those of long ago. I am God and there is no other. This is very much a sovereignty statement. I am God and there is no other God. I think that's really at the heart of this. I am God, there is none like me. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times what is still to come. And this line, it's just one of those beauties. I say, my purpose will stand and I'll do as I please. My purpose will stand and I do as I please. I don't know if we can get a more sovereign kind of statement than that. It's put in contrast to false gods, any other religion, any other spiritual power or reality. And the ones we set up for ourselves, there's that, like you set it up, there's nothing to it. You're the one who made that. But he goes further than that. Not only are they inert and can't do anything, he can do what he pleases. He can form a plan and complete it. Again, I think that's different than he's just playing a game of chess and moving us around. He is speaking, I think, to your idea earlier of authority. And he's contrasting that to all the other ways we scramble for whoever, whatever is what we should worship or who we should follow. No, he's the one to follow. And he's the one to follow in a sea of voices of who to follow. I don't know how that strikes you, but this really strikes me as
It strikes me as a
deal.
problem we don't really have today. It's not like we struggle with idols today.
Great, isn't that super?
No, I was actually thinking like I feel like I'm getting kind of a fuller picture of what this idea is. Like, for example, today I skipped my workout in the morning because it was a rough night, lots of allergies, just didn't get a lot of sleep, right? And I was just tired. I got to do a lot today. I'm just going to get my day going, skip the workout. Even though that's something that I should do, but I told myself like, I don't want to do that. Right. And it feels like, who am I to decide I'm going to do anything? I should do the things I should do. That's a very minor example, right? Like I could choose like actually deliberately like actively sinning or something as an example, but that's just what jumped out.
But it works. You were choosing.
Yeah, I chose that I want this, I'm going to do it. What human being can do that or should do that? None is the answer. Like God is the one who says, I make a plan, I do it.
And he can.
And he can
pull it
and
off.
he does. And he does it despite human free will.
There now we've gotten to, I think, they use the word in your reading, paradox.
Yeah.
Is it a paradox or are we just not thinking about it very well? My purpose will stand, I'll do as I please. Well, okay, Isaiah, what you're saying is God just plain old does what he wants. And at the end of the day, us little peons, it doesn't matter what we do because he's just going to do it. I don't think so. In fact, I would even take some issue with my brothers in Christ that argue for the irresistible will of God. I think really, even though I'm trying to look at that fairly, the word irresistible isn't working for me. It isn't working for me. Maybe another example.
Yeah.
Jonah.
Okay. So we were on eating grass. Now we're on to big fish.
Or on to big fish.
Okay.
On to big fish. In particular, in the story of Jonah, this setup of it is that God wants him to go. God has a purpose.
Yeah.
God
to
wants.
Nineveh. Right?
Go to Nineveh.
Yeah.
Go to Nineveh. I want you to preach to Nineveh. I want you to preach actually judgment to Nineveh. I want you to go do that.
Right.
And Nineveh's the enemy. And Nineveh's the bad guys. The capital of the bad guys that have caused a lot of difficulty for the Jews. He doesn't want to go. He doesn't want to do that. And actually, I've been thinking about Jonah more because it's been a Sunday school class being taught at my church. Guys doing a great job. In the story of Jonah, I keep seeing God acting. I keep seeing him acting in a sovereign way. I'll give you a little list.
Okay.
Chapter 1, verse 4. God sent a great wind. That was the storm. Verse 17. He prepared a huge fish. In chapter 2, God commanded the fish to vomit Jonah out. Chapter 4, verse 6, God provided a leafy plant. Remember, there was a plant that shaded him after it was all over because he's going to watch the city burn.
Right.
And it's desert region, and God provides him shade. A verse later, God provided a worm and killed the plant, which then got Jonah upset, and he's upset. He's upset to want to die.
Right.
He's really upset. Verse 8, God provided a scorching east wind to make him uncomfortable. What I'm saying here is the story of Jonah shows God acting in wild ways. I mean, we even get
in nature.
Yeah, even over superseding the natural order of things. Fish don't swallow people. Plants don't grow up overnight. Storms have meteorological causes, but this one, it sounds like, had a supernatural one.
Mm-hmm.
And it put Jonah in a spot. Now, that's the action of God. He has a purpose. He wants to reach Nineveh. But I also know that the story of Jonah has Jonah, when the Lord says, go to Nineveh, no.
Yeah.
He gets on a boat going the wrong way.
Right.
When the storm is up, God doesn't throw him into the sea. Jonah says, I think this is all my fault. Throw me into the sea. The whole story, Jonah's suicidal. I mean, it just keeps happening over and over. But I think that one we might overlook.
Right.
And so here's where we kind of come to the illustration. Jonah's acting of his own. No, back up. God sends a storm.
Mm-hmm.
But Jonah's will tells those guys, you got to throw me over. They're a little reluctant to do it, but their wills throw him over. Right? But then it says God provided a great fish. I bet you God provided that fish before Jonah hit the water. God is at work interacting with a guy's will that he has some knowledge of but isn't causing. And here we come to the sovereignty idea. Isn't it wild that God is at work in the middle of Jonah's choices, some of which are not good? God's at work. And then later in the story, God's doing these things, but Jonah has to still decide. God has the fish throw him on the beach. Jonah could have turned around and said, I'm not going to that city.
Right.
Or he could have gone to that city and said, I'm just here for the food.
Right.
I'm not going to do that.
He could have swam back after the fish. Like, I'm not done with you.
Yeah. Give me my socks back.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is the story illustrates that there's people action and there's God's action, but the story shows God's purpose, which actually Jonah's not very happy about. God's purpose was redemptive.
Yeah.
He wanted, and they did, and the people could have not responded. Nineveh could have gone, okay, that's weird. That guy's doing strange stuff. What's for lunch?
Right.
Their will reacted. And then Jonah's will reacts against that and goes, man, this is lame. My words didn't come true. I wish I could die. And the Lord at the end of that whole story says something to the effect of, should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh? God's purpose. What I get out of this is God's amazing sovereignty that says his purpose can stand is true, but his purposes also intersect and interact with human will. Choice is good, choice is bad. Even a bad choice can be worked by God.
Right.
Story of Joseph. Those boys shouldn't have sold him to the Ishmaelite raiders.
Right.
But in the end of Genesis, we have him say, you meant this for evil, but God worked it to good.
Yeah.
God worked it to good.
Right.
So my sense of awe about sovereignty is, wow, he can do beyond. He can do beyond the natural. He can reach forward and see things that then we anticipate. That's more than anticipation. He can form plans and provide a fish ahead of Jonah's choices.
Right.
And there's lots of examples of that. I think sovereignty is more mysterious and deeper than we want to try to pack it into a paragraph or get a line. This fancy name really touches on a really beautiful, amazing thing. Which then, I don't know, Tyler, how do we respond to that? How do we, as followers of Christ, act if sovereignty's like this? How should we be?
Well, I was actually thinking about Jesus while you were talking about that, and I think the answer is something that he said when he taught the disciples how to pray. Your will be done. I think that's the response.
That's
to
certainly
sovereignty.
humble, right?
Yeah.
I want to be humble to you on that, Lord.
Yeah. Right. So, there's probably more to talk about on that, but my question is there's a contrast, right? So in Philippians, Paul is talking about Jesus was equal with God, but he didn't consider equality with God, and he humbled himself to death, even death on the cross, right? So I would assume Jesus is also sovereign.
When he's walking around on earth?
Definitely post-resurrection. I don't know about
Definitely post-resurrection. But I think I would argue...
because there's kenosis going on, right?
There's a lot of giving up.
Yeah.
So if I was reading it, I would say Jesus submits to God the Father's sovereignty.
Yes.
I think while he's walking around.
Yeah.
But I would say that in the present setting, he is co-sovereign now. But in that moment, he says, I'm here to do the Father's will. That sounds like Father's sovereignty.
Okay. Well, so I think my question is still there then.
Okay.
So were you the one who was preaching on this on Sunday? I listened to a lot of stuff. Jesus is calling people and he says to someone like, come follow me, which is a big deal. Right. And then the guy's like, I got to go. It was you. It was Sunday.
It was Sunday. Yeah.
Right.
The potential disciple says, I got to go.
Right.
Help my family.
Right. So we're talking about how God kind of works out all things because he's sovereign, despite human will making mistakes. He works it all out. Right. And we're talking about how do we respond to sovereignty? It feels like, I don't know what it feels like. My question is, should there be an urgency to that response? Like that potential disciple.
Wasn't that a terrible story? The guy went away.
Yeah.
Or the rich young ruler, why don't you just give up everything, follow me? No.
Right.
Yes, I think there is an urgency that says, maybe it says this. I recognize that God has purposes that he can fulfill. I also recognize that he chooses to interact with me. So my will does matter. But I need to be urgent in the sense of responding. I mean, the guy doesn't follow. Was Jesus serious? Come follow me. Was he serious? He was absolutely serious. What was Jesus expecting? Him to go, yes.
Right.
I'll follow you. And the man said, well, I got some business to do with the family. I can't do that. Or, I got a lot of 401k, I really can't. Yeah. I can't liquidate that. You're asking.
I got to go put the stuff into a trust and then I can come.
Yeah, maybe later.
Yeah.
And our will can say no to the sovereign God. And that actually might be the very definition of us being moral beings, able to choose. Able to choose wrongly. Isn't that the Adam and Eve story? Able to choose. If we don't incorporate that the ability to choose interacts with God in a way that says, no, I won't, we're stuck with the whole robot idea. And love goes out the window. Loving is a choice. It's an action. I can love God. I can reject God. I can love my wife, or I can not. We come to another big fancy name, but I think that sovereignty must interact with the idea of will and choice. And without will and choice, by us as humans, by angels and demons and whatever else God's created that has a sentient ability to choose, a moral agency of any sort, the moral agency requires that I can say no to the sovereign God. That doesn't mean that his game is up. His purposes can incorporate and work through our wrong choices. Yeah. But that doesn't make them not wrong. And that there can be a cost, either to us personally or to others.
Right.
You know, Hitler shouldn't have done what he did.
Which thing? Just kidding.
Make a list. He shouldn't. He said no, right?
Yeah.
He said no to morality. He said no to what God wanted. It's beyond horrible. Great evil came from that.
Yeah.
At the same time, the result of such horror and evil was the creation of a safe space and place for Israel that didn't exist before that. The nation of Israel came out of World War II and the genocide of the Nazis.
Well, okay, my question on that very note then is that not the natural order of things? Like, isn't that the story for everything? Like, some bad happened. Oh, look, there was some good out of it. Like, I'm sure there's very specific examples of like, that's just 100% tragic. But on the grand scale of things, like, aren't most things like that?
Well, maybe we should ask that a little farther. Is it that it's an illustration of God's sovereignty when there is a reversal, when there is a gain, even in tragedy? Is this God at work? Is this God at work? As a Christian, I can say, I think God could be at work. My line is God's a great pancake flipper. You know, he can flip the situation and work in it. His purposes can work in wild ways. You know, I gave the illustration of Joseph. Those were murderous boys selling him. They almost killed him. They sold him.
Right.
Great loss. I mean, 20 years of his life, he's incarcerated or a slave. Well, not all that 20, but a good chunk of it.
Yeah.
Their action was evil. Yet there's pancake flipping going on. There's God at work. I think we wouldn't want to be trite about it. Oh, you know what? There's a silver lining to every cloud. You know, that kind of Pollyanna kind of thing, which is supposed to help a person when somebody died or tragedy struck or the earthquake happened. I think that's shallow.
Yeah.
But I do think because of God's sovereignty, I trust him. I think trust is kind of this response here. Trust. You are greater than any other God or pseudo-God. You can act within and without the natural order of things. Miracles possible.
Mm-hmm.
You are not limited to just the present. You have foreknowledge. And you have purposes for mankind. They're redemptive and they're good.
Yeah.
So I can trust a good and powerful God. I can trust a sovereign God. That is what he's calling me to do. Now I feel like that's not shallow. That's actually pretty deep.
Mm-hmm.
And in the middle of whatever mess goes on or whatever evil is transpiring, I'm not like, oh, well, God works all things together for good. That's true. Except I don't think we want to say it in a trite or light way. Man, human behavior is bad. My choices matter. There's urgency here. How do I respond? I trust a God who is bigger than this. I can have purposes that I can't even see.
It kind of, the way we're talking about it, moves it from trust into faith, actually.
I think so.
Like, I don't know, at least in my head, faith seems like a step above trust, but
I think they're kissing cousins, but
probably.
But I think the word faith is a great one. We'll have to have it one of these days. But I think, yes, I think Nebuchadnezzar was exercising a form of faith to say, you're God, you're over everything, and your, how did he put it? His dominion's an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of earth. I think that's a humble statement, But is it also I recognize? I think we recognize that he's both powerful and good. I think that's where faith trust is.
Yeah.
Not just power,
Yeah.
not just raw power. We can knuckle under power. Your boss can tell you,
Yeah.
do that, and
Right.
you can do it or walk. Right.
Right. That's kind of like the earthly view of sovereignty. Like I like to think of like a medieval like king, and like there's some troublesome tribe out there, and he calls the tribe in. And he's like, "Hey, you can continue to not do the things I want you to do. It's not going to end well." And so it's
Because I have the power.
right. And so it's a group acting out of their own free will against the authority of the king, and the king uses power to put them back in line. Right.
Mhm.
That's how I used to look at God, like for a really long time, because I didn't have the best fatherly example. Let's just leave it at that.
So he's big enough to put his thumb on you.
Oh yeah, and that's all it was. Like it was like, where's the goodness? Like I never actually asked that, but it was.
But it's real.
It was real. And it wasn't until I had my own kid that I started to kind of look at God differently. Like I started to understand better the fatherly perspective. And you chose that sentence carefully, understand better. There's no way I'd get it. But that's, okay, that's going to lead me to a bonkers question. So like I have my son, right? And I have a key to this room, which is on the church property, right? So I have some level of authority over this room, right? When I tell my toddler, go play, please go play. That doesn't mean leave the house, walk down to the church by yourself, get into the studio and wreak havoc, right?
No.
That's not what that means.
No way.
Right. So I don't know how this relates to the goodness part, but this is just the question I have in my head. Like I have good intentions for my son, right? Like I want good things, and I want to allow for him to experience goodness and adventure and all of those things, right? And I have authority over this room in this example. Like if we expand out now, that's an analogy. God is God and we are us, and the universe is his domain. Like when he says, go, multiply, subdue, do things, go, Great Commission, right? Like all those things. Is he including the stars in that? I know that I told you it was going bonkers. I told you. So like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want Kit to come down here by himself. When I say play, go do the things I want you to do. Does God not want us to go out into the stars and to play and experiment and figure out and discover and adventure? Or is that part of the thing that we're all doing here, him included? Weird question, I know.
No, it's okay to have a question like that. Is your fatherly goodness, to come back to you and your son, is your fatherly goodness expressed in, yes, I want you to discover and learn, but my fatherly goodness provides a fence?
That's exactly yes, that's what I'm trying to get at. Yes.
And is it part of my goodness to provide the fence?
Right.
Is it part of my goodness to say, as I did to my little girls in my day,
yeah,
then you can play in the front yard. There wasn't a fence. You can play in the front yard, but you cannot go out in the street.
Right.
I made a fence. It was a invisible one, but it was real. If the ball rolled out in the street, they had to come get me, or they had to walk around the cul-de-sac to where it was on the other side, on the sidewalk.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Because the street was dangerous, and I care about them, and there's no way I want them tangling with 2 tons of metal. So the goodness of God provides a fence. So you can ask legitimately, just because we can do something, should we do something?
Right.
It's a kind of a science question, isn't it?
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I don't know the answer to the stars, because I think God, in his creation of beings that discover, learn, he wants us to learn about our planet. He wants us to learn about the universe around us.
I think that's the whole job he gives to Adam. Like that's what that means. Go and name everything means go and figure it out. Like and then call it as it should be, right?
And turn some nature into culture.
Right.
All art, all construction, turn nature into culture. I don't know the answer specifically to the stars. My feed is, let's go to Mars. My feed is that discovery and that exploration is worth it. A human endeavor to discover more about the amazing universe that God made. However, depending on how things end, ultimately on this little planet, I'm wondering if on the other side, on the heaven side, on the making all things right end of it, the fence might get a little bigger. Our ability to discover, explore, expand, and learn about the universe of God could be much, much, much larger that side than it is here. My tendency would be to say the kinds of fences God provides are more about danger to us, harm to us. Sin is bad for us.
Yeah.
But the sovereign God can say, you shouldn't do that.
Right.
And that he can actually enforce penalty to help us learn that.
Right.
Which I would say our culture is not very fond of that idea. That God has the sovereign power to say, knock it off. And that he can deliver correction.
Mm-hmm.
Those Ninevites needed correction. They did.
Yeah.
He was sending a corrective word. You repent or be destroyed. That's strong correction. Repent or be destroyed. The beauty of a good God was he worked through a reluctant dude to deliver the message. And the great news is they responded, at least for a time, and they were not destroyed in that moment, because the idea of the fence is helpful. The idea of some things are right and some things are wrong is for our good.
On that very note, actually, and kind of like circling back to the beginning of our conversation, I remember being a child, not being allowed to play in the street, right? And then you get older and it's like, walk yourself to school. I don't want to deal with you. You know what I mean? And I remember the transition between the street was not allowed and the sidewalk is allowed. And there's a kind of,
and now you're driving the car on the street.
Right. And but every one of those steps, there's a level of pride that comes like, I can do this. It's interesting that I think you can talk to pretty much anyone who's been in orbit, and they all say the same thing. They're like, I am so small. We are so small. This
is such a big place.
Yeah, there's an effect. There's an actual term that I can't remember. Yeah.
But if we were to use a biblical one, humility.
But that's my point exactly. Is that going out into the stars seems to have the reverse effect than going out into the street.
We don't feel more pride.
Yeah.
More recognition.
I think the engineers who build the rockets might have a lot of pride, but the people who sit on them don't, which is very interesting. So,
but isn't there a good lesson there?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
And I have a better human model than you did. The expansion of trust from my dad to me was a recognition that I could act wisely, that I could act in a way that was healthy for me. And I would look both ways crossing the street. Yeah. I would get out of the street if a semi is coming down it. But there was a time when he's not trusting that.
Right.
I can't know that I wouldn't just freeze or not even look.
Right.
Or not even understand. we were talking about trusting God, right?
Yeah.
Does God, in our development, trust us? Expand his trust in us. Invest in us more responsibility, more, even, could I use the word, authority over our decisions and things. And that we should recognize that that is a process and not buck so hard when we're not very well developed, when the fence is pretty tight,
Mm-hmm.
and then recognize that it is a point of, hey, the Lord is expanding what I can do, where I can go. I should feel good about my development. You know what? He's
Right.
trusting me.
Right.
It might be another day's conversation, but
No,
I think that's pretty strong interaction with sovereignty, isn't it?
Yes, it feels like it feels like trust isn't a means to an end. Trust is a means to friendship.
Relationship.
Like you're talking about, like I can't remember how you phrased it just now, but you're talking about how we have a level of authority and we're supposed to do something with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something to that effect. A couple things jump out at me. It's Moses changes the mind of God.
Oh, we have these cases.
Right, and that, but it's not because he wasn't a Christian; he was a Jew, but he's not a baby Jew, right? He's
a person of God,
and he's mature in his experience with God, right? And there's a lot of trust there. There's been a lot of dynamics, right? David was a friend of God, and once again, it wasn't like little shepherd boy David; it was mature David, right? Which I'm not saying little shepherd boy David wasn't mature. I'm sure he was, but
not like he was later.
Right, and then Paul talks in the New Testament about how Jesus calls you friends now, like so it feels like the trust isn't just because God is sovereign. The trust leads to friendship and co-working.
It's mutual, isn't it?
Yeah, right.
Think of it being mutual with the sovereign Lord.
That's insane.
Isn't that great?
That's almost crazier than going to the stars.
It might be, but I think you bring us to a great point. This sovereign God is powerful and good, but both of those are important. And he wants to interact with us.
Right.
He absolutely wants. The whole story is about interaction.
Yeah.
Whole story. He wants to interact. That is so mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And cool.
Right.
Which is light years away from the chessboard and moving pieces. Because that doesn't take any interaction. That's just power.
Yeah.
On, go to night 4,
Right.
It's just God's interaction, and we're just, it's absolutely the opposite of that. Real understanding of God's sovereignty is recognizing that in his power and ability and goodness, he even built into us will. The capability to interact with him is necessarily also the capability to reject him and to go the other way. Going the other way does not mean he doesn't play another card. He did that with Jonah.
Right.
It doesn't mean that he won't reach, try.
Right.
But that ability to interact with him, I think, I hope I'm not saying something too foolish. The ability to interact with us is the reason for the creation. That he created beings to interact with.
Mm-hmm.
And if he's going to interact with us, he has to create the possibility that we can reject and refuse and harm ourselves and hurt each other.
Right.
That was a pretty expensive make.
Yeah. And those elements of the creation.
Yeah, those elements of the creation.
Feels like part of the imaging that we do.
Yeah.
Or are.
And as dads are doing.
Yeah.
in a small way,
Yeah.
because we don't have God's kind of knowledge for our kid, but we do have more knowledge they do.
Yeah.
And we don't have the same level of goodness that God has, but we want good for them.
Yeah.
And we don't know how everything works, but we know how a lot of things work that they're going to discover with us. And I can say, a little ahead of you on this, I can say that my adult children are friends. And that I still get to interact with them. They weren't friends as children.
Yeah, that's
I was the parent,
right.
And they're the kid, but I was angling for mutual relationship. And I think it's one of the great graces and blessings of my life that there is mutual relationship.
Yeah.
That was what we were after.
Yeah.
Is that what God's after?
That's weird. That is actually exactly what I was thinking about going to bed last night. That's weird.
You were thinking that last night?
Yeah. You being friends with my wife.
Mm.
Yeah. Weird.
And maybe you too.
Oh, yes, certainly.
Because I do have 8 kids,
That's a lot. And your grandchildren are expanding rapidly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Tyler, I just feel like I think we made some ground here on what sovereignty is and isn't.
Yeah. And I have enough humility to say that I barely get it.
I don't think we can. I mean, you got giants of the faith trying to write about it, still are trying to write about it. Books are still being made about it. And you got churches differing in their doctrine here pretty strongly and firmly. But I think some of what we're talking about, power of God being really about authority, goodness of God being absolutely crucial to this, and that interaction with us, in his sovereignty, he chooses to interact with us and give us room for that we might develop and grow, has to be incorporated into what sovereignty is, or we're just too shallow on this.
It's almost like the whole thing has to be good. Like there's no point in any of it happening if it's not good. Yeah, I understand tragedy happens and all that, right? Right. But in the grand, if you look at it, if we could even possibly try to do it, but from God's perspective, it's a good thing.
If he says, my purposes will stand.
Yeah.
It's a good purpose, isn't it?
Right.
And he will.
Right.
And I get to trust in that his purposes will stand.
Yeah.
Good purposes for us. Which is really the opposite of despair, right? Like, everything's random. It's not going to work out.
Right.
There's actually evil in the world and it's going to win.
Right.
Despair.
Right.
The sovereignty of God beats despair.
Yeah.
And says, his purpose is good purpose. And will stand.
Yeah. That's really good.
Now, we got some other stuff coming with our site.
Oh, yeah. It's so kind of. Excuse me. We're ending this episode now. Here's the announcements. If you want more,
if I cut you off.
No, you did not cut me off. No, I think that's a fantastic. I don't have anything else to say on it.
I think we'll just be in awe a little bit of who God is here. That's where I'm at.
Right. This is a rough transition from awe. If you want more of any of our musings, I have a Substack. It's tylerfriend.substack. And you have a Substack now. I assume it's David Baker. The links are going to be in the description. They exist. You do Today in the Word is what it's called?
Yeah, a little devotion. They're between a minute and a minute and a half long.
Yeah.
And they come out of what I feel like God's doing in my life. And if you want it, the Substack's the place to go.
Yep.
There'll be 5 a week.
Yep. I got a couple different things going on mine. Check it out. If you like fantasy, there's some fantasy stuff there. The genre, not imagining things in your head.
I actually just read a couple of his stories and I thought they were hilarious. So there you go.
Well, thank you.
Pretty funny. The tongue is in the cheek for sure.
Oh, excellent. That's what I was going for. So we will be back next week with a new fancy name.
Yeah.
So thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and have a good week. We'll see you next time. Bye.